Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of my mobile photography masterclass. This is Advanced Editing Techniques. Now, in my last episode, episode 5, we talked about some basics of editing, and in that video, we talked about the different apps I use, and in this video, we're going to dive deep into how to edit an actual photo. Now, like I mentioned in that episode, we're going to use VSCO for this edit from start to finish. So without further ado, let's dive into my iPhone. So we're going to open up VSCO here, and we're going to edit this photo right here of my new Rolex book that I got from Christmas from a friend of mine. It was just laying on our island kitchen table in the kitchen with some flowers in the composition. Kind of a random photo, but again, back on my lesson in episode 4 on tonality, a lot of the colors in this photo are kind of the same hue in that orange yellow, and then I threw in a striking color of red from the book to make it stand out from the rest. So I'm going to go down here on the lower left hand corner and tap edit. Once I do that, I'm going to go and look at all presets and scroll. I might have a lot more than you because I pay for the full subscription of VSCO. If you only have the free version, you'll have a lot less filters to choose from, but I believe the filter I'm using is a free filter anyways, and it is M5. M5 is a classic filter for VSCO, and I've always loved it. It is quite warm, so don't be alarmed by how warm it looks out the gate, but right when I apply it, I'm going to turn that filter down to about 5 to 7 strength, and I'll show you what I mean. So if we tap M5, right away it has a very warm look to it. If I tap M5 again, it'll go into the strength of that filter, which I will turn down all the way till about 6.5. That will still give me a unique M5 look without overpowering the image and making it look kind of extra. I'll press the check mark here, and then on the lower left hand corner, beside the first icon is these 2 sliders, which is where I'll do all my editing for this photo. Now first, I can already tell that I'm going to go over to the tone section and bring up the shadows because there's a lot of shadows on the lower portion of this photograph. You can see as I raise that, it gets brighter. Those shadows come up from below. I'll bring it almost all the way up to about 8. And then on the upper part of my composition, the highlights are not blown out by any means, but I will save them or bring them back down a little bit to match the tonality of the lower part of that image. So if I raise that slider, you'll see the highlights start to come back, and just about there, almost at the same part that shadows is at. Now, the top of my frame and the bottom of my frame match in light and dark. Press the check mark again. Now, honestly, for this image, the exposure does look pretty darn good. Usually, I do underexpose a bit more, but for this photo, because the Rolex book is the darker part of the image, I will keep it at 0. If not, I actually might bring it up a little bit to 0.5. Yeah, there we go. So I brought my exposure up to 0.5 just to give it a little bit of a boost. Now contrast, I usually keep contrast at either 0 or boost it just a little bit, but I normally don't really touch it. So in this photo, I will bring it up to about 0.5. It just makes the blacks a little bit richer and contrasty compared to the whites of the image. Next, I'm going to bring up the sharpening quite a bit on this photo. I'm going to bring it all the way up to probably 3. Now the reason I do that is because I want to make sure the photo is as crisp as possible. Now the downside to adding sharpening is that the photo can start to look a bit artificial or computerized if you bring sharpening all the way up, especially with a photo that has sharp edges like this photo with text on the cover of the book. So to compensate that, which I'll talk about in a second, I'm going to add grain to make the photo appear more natural. So I'll save that. I'll go over to saturation. Again, the saturation in this image is already quite good. It's a little bit muted, but I do like the fact that the red does stand out against the rest. In my regular photos, I will usually bring the saturation up just a tad, maybe to 0.3 or 0.5. Actually, you know what? 0.5 for this photo does look good, so I'll keep it there for this one. Next up is white balance. Now, white balance is quite important for all my images. My images in particular, I like to go with more of a green hue because I find that the iPhone especially shoots photos a bit cooler and with a bit of a magenta hue to the white balance. So I'm going to move the tint slider to the left a little bit, probably to 0.5. Yep, that looks good. And the photo is already warm enough, but if I am using a different filter that isn't as warm as N5, then I will bring that temperature up. In this case, it is warm enough, so I'm going to keep it at 0. Next up is skin tone. Now in this photo, there is no skin tones, but usually what this setting will change is how the skin tones appear in comparison to the rest of the image. Now for almost every single one of my images, I bring the skin tone slider to the right, which makes the skin tones a bit more green and yellow as compared to if you went to the left, it makes it a bit more red and magenta. And then my favorite feature of them all, like I mentioned earlier, the grain. Now grain, I usually crank for photos on the iPhone. I usually bring it to about 3 or 3.5. If I zoom into the photo, you can start to see the grain, especially around the fork and on the white background. You can see the granular texture that is added, and that will help with a few things. The most noticeable callout that a photo was taken with a phone is that the edges on the photo look a bit artificial and kind of computerized. When you add grain, that helps to soften those edges or soften the transition of the edges from the background and the foreground to make the photo look a bit more natural. And again, my photo editing style is that of a film camera or a disposable camera that happens to be higher quality. So by adding grain and adding sharpening, it kind of blends those two things together and gives it this really nice look. You'll notice if the photo doesn't have one focal point or subject, like if it's a wide landscape, let's say, the more grain you add, the worse the photo is going to look. So make sure you're a bit more conservative if the photo is maybe of a landscape without any one unique subject in the foreground. And then that's honestly it. So I'm going to go ahead and press next on this photo and press save to camera roll. Now if I like a certain edit that I've made on VSCO, what I'm going to do is highlight that photo, press down here where it says more on the lower right, and tap create draft. Now what that's going to do is it'll save that photo with those edits and make it copyable for future photos. I do this every once in a while, and I would advise you to, because you as a photographer probably have a unique style and shoot very similar things from one day to the next. So by creating drafts, you're able to copy the edits from one photo and apply it to another one, and for the most part it'll look good. The things you want to look out for are your exposure value, the white balance, and the level of grain like we just talked about. Usually the exposure will differ depending on the photograph or scenario that you're in. The white balance will also change because the iPhone does have auto white balance when it shoots an image, so applying a filter from one photo to the next doesn't take into account that white balance change. And then, like we talked about before, the level of grain will also depend on the subject in your photo. And that wraps up episode 6, Advanced Editing Techniques. In the next episode, episode 7, we're going to talk about what my style is with iPhone photography and how to achieve that look. We'll see you there.